Hello everyone! We've added this note to the beginning of all of our original episodes of the podcast to let you know of a few changes that have happened around here and hopefully avoid any confusion for you as listeners. When we began this podcast, it was called Starseed Survival Guide, and most people called me, your host, by my birth name, Erin. Throughout the first 22 episodes, you'll hear me introduce myself as Erin, hear others refer to me as Erin, and hear many references to the name of the show being Starseed Survival Guide. In 2018, more and more folks began calling us Yaya, and in March of 2020, we changed the name of this podcast to Earthside Survival Guide to more accurately reflect our intentions for the show. For a little more of the full story of what these changes mean to us, please check out episode 23, a temple talk where we reflect on where we've been, where we are now, and where we're going. We thank you for your patience during this transition, for listening and sharing this journey with us, and most importantly, for allowing us to continue to grow and evolve. Blessings.
And as I call in the east, I walk into the stream, and as I call in the south, I bring water to my mouth, and as I call in the west, the creek swallows my chest, and as I call in the north, I am swallowed by her soul.
Greetings, Starseeds, and welcome to the Starseed Survival Guide podcast. I'll be your host, Erin Rivera Merriman, and I'm honored to facilitate a place for us to virtually gather to be seeded, activated, and germinated by the infinite well of galactic and terrestrial wisdom that is available to all in every moment. Thank you for hearing the call, for remembering that there is so very much more to life, and showing up to explore the secret, esoteric, mystical, and unorthodox pathways to liberation that are and forever will be open to you and all who seek them with sincerity. We welcome and hail to the guardians and the gatekeepers who dwell eternally in the liminal realms. We humbly beseech your assistance today in opening these portals between the dimensions so that those who have tuned in with this transmission may find themselves able to listen from a deeper place and receive the hybrid medicine and restructuring that the helper spirits who called this broadcast into being so generously provide. May you as sacred listeners hear what you need to hear and discard anything that is not of value to your own stated intentions for your life and the fulfillment of your soul's purpose in the most enjoyable, most beautiful possible way. Starseed Survival Guide is a listener-supported program, and we hope that if you find value in the experience we share here today, that you might consider offering support by visiting us online at www.activeculturefamily.com and making a purchase or donation. Many blessings to you on your journey, and we hope you enjoy the show. Hi everyone, it's me Erin, and I'm really happy to be sitting down and finally putting this episode together for you today. I think it's been about 6 months since we put out an episode because, as some of you know, we started a school last year in the Cleveland National Forest, a women's mystery school, and it has been a wild ride getting that going, and a steep learning curve with lots of joys and challenges, and we just graduated our first group of 20 apprentices last month, and I have a little bit of a break here before preparing to welcome our next group of 20 next month, and decided to use that time to try to get some of these episodes out to you that we have been recording in the last few months. So today we're taking it back to the very beginning of my spiritual journey, which many of you know was largely motivated by the chronic pain condition that I developed as a result of fibromyalgia in my teens, and that I dabbled hard from age 16 to about 26, and it wasn't until I was 26 that I was able to find some more consistent teachings and teachers in Buddhism, in the Buddhist community of New York City. So I had been dating the singer of a band that I discovered also at 16. I had torn a interview with them out of Spin magazine and tacked it on my wall, and then when I moved to New York City a few years later, ended up meeting the singer, and we were together for about 3 years. And about halfway through that time, this person confessed that they were still having feelings for their ex-wife and that they wanted to leave the relationship and pursue, or at least understand, if there was any potential still there. And my response was just that I didn't see anything wrong with them having feelings, and a desire to explore what they were about and not to rush to any decisions and maybe get some therapy with your ex-wife. And so while that was happening, it was a pretty uncertain time for me emotionally, and I remember walking out of the bedroom of the apartment that he shared with a couple of roommates and finding the Pema Chodron book, Start Where You Are, on the kitchen table. And I borrowed the book, and so unappealing to me was the idea of Buddhism that I never actually committed to reading the book. I read the last page and it spoke to me, and so then I read the second to last page and it spoke to me, and so I read the third to last page. So I ended up reading the entire book backwards on the subway and felt things I hadn't felt before, felt met in the in-between spaces that I always felt I occupied. And so I started to look for Buddhist community in New York City, and I found the Fire Lotus Temple in Brooklyn and their upstate New York sister community, maybe you would call it, called Zen Mountain Monastery. And then I started sitting with Dharma punks, and I think it was in a Thursday night Dharma punk meditation with Josh Korda that they invited some folks from a different lineage of Buddhism. We were practicing in the Theravadan tradition, and they invited some Zen monks to come speak to us about a chaplaincy training program that they were starting. So they were recruiting. And I had always thought of Zen as dry. They wore the gray robes and the shaved head and the monotone chanting, and you keep your eyes open so you can't get too lost in your inner fantasy world, and it just felt very mundane. But this person had a quality that I couldn't deny, and an incredible sense of humor and depth and presence, and I wanted to develop those capacities in myself. I was very attracted to those qualities. So I dove in to this year-long chaplaincy training, which was primarily a hospice training, but I ended up being able to work my hours, my clinic hours, if you will, in prison. And so that's when I had support for exploring prison ministry, and which I haven't spoken much about in this space. And over the time period of that course, I ended the relationship with that original person that I had begun exploring Buddhism with, and ended up getting married to an old friend from college who later became my son's father. And the monks from the chaplaincy training married us in our ceremony, and it was great. They said something like, by the power invested in us by whatever, we now pronounce you man and wife. So one of those monks called Koshin Paley Ellison is who we're going to be speaking with today. We know each other in a pretty deep and unique capacity, and we also haven't spoken in about 10 years. And something happens for me pretty consistently in the presence of people who are resting in a different quality of consciousness, which is that I get really giggly. So I am laughing through a lot of this interview, and I hope that it's not totally intolerable to y'all. A little bit of background about our guest. Sensei Koshin Paley Ellison is a jungian psychotherapist, recognized teacher in the Soto Zen lineage of the White Plum Asanga, and the academic advisor for the Buddhist students in the Master in Pastoral Care and Counseling program at the New York Theological Seminary. Koshin is the co-founder of the New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care, the first Zen-based organization to offer fully accredited clinical chaplaincy training in America, and the co-editor of Awake at the Bedside, Contemplative Teachings on Palliative and End-of-Life Care. And at this point, we welcome Koshin to the show, and I did a thing I do from time to time as a novice podcaster, which is forget to press record until we've already been speaking for a minute or two. So we're just speaking about lineage and where he comes from and how he came to be a leading force in offering a good death here in America.
Survivors and people who moved from various countries when they felt that there was difficulty arising, that they actually took action. And so I love coming from a lineage of people from mostly Eastern Europe, and who all paid attention to what was happening. And even when people thought they were crazy, they trusted themselves and moved forward. And I feel that in many ways, much of what I do is because I come from that lineage of people who loved living and loved justice and loved trusting their own authenticity, even when everyone around them thought it wasn't so. Yeah, so I think that I wouldn't be doing all of what I'm doing without all of them, for sure. I, as a very young boy, I told my mother I wanted to grow up to be a Zen Buddhist monk when I was 8 years old.
Wow.
So there was a very early propensity. And that kind of clarity that it's hard sometimes to understand where that comes from. And I started sitting Zen meditation in high school, and it just always felt very clear. I had a teacher named Sensei White, and he was a karate teacher, and we used to sit on the wood floor on our knees for 20 minutes, which was extremely painful.
Wow.
And we would sit there being very still and sweat pouring down our whole bodies until you just really relax. And I can still remember that experience so many times. And there was something about when he said that you have to learn how to be still and quiet in order to actually move.
Mm.
And he said, you don't move with wisdom and compassion without really knowing what it means to not move.
Wow.
And I remember thinking as an 11-year-old, like, this was like the coolest thing ever. And I felt like I was in superhero training. And it really felt like nothing else I had ever encountered. So that's part of why I'm here. And I think I'm also here because of our family friends, Jerry and Michael, who died of HIV/AIDS in the beginning of the AIDS pandemic before it had a name.
Mm.
And so after karate practice, I would go and visit them in the hospital and see how they were being treated. And being treated really poorly.
Mm.
And they were just people that I loved. And so I didn't really understand why they were being treated poorly. And they taught me so much about the dignity in the midst of being treated poorly and how it's all very ordinary.
Mm.
I'm also here because in 11th grade, Mrs. Spillane, my English teacher, would turn off the lights and read Emily Dickinson to us. And she would just say, just listen with every cell of your body.
Wow.
I mean, just about like all of these experiences of learning just to stop and pay attention. And yeah, and when I was 17, I went out to Boulder, Colorado, and then to meet Allen Ginsberg, because I'd read about him and I heard that he was like teaching there. So I decided I had to meet him. And on my way to meet him, I actually ended up meeting my first Zen teacher. It was so amazing. John Dideluri, and he was like walking down the street smoking a cigarette. And I just thought he looked so cool too. And yeah, and he was the first person who began teaching me about Zen in a more formal way.
He may have been my first Zen teacher too, now that I think about it. I didn't know that about you, yeah. Smoking a cigarette, going to see Allen Ginsberg.
Pretty amazing.
That's good.
Yeah. So it's amazing I think all of us have these kaleidoscopes of experiences that make us who we are. And mine just tended to keep moving into expression, intimacy, and silence, and vitality.
Mm. That's a potent combination. It's a potent recipe for some good medicine, I think.
Yeah. And I think I just over time, what I've learned is the power of what my first, my karate teacher talked about, the power of stillness. And how that truly makes so many things possible and lively, to really allow ourselves to really participate and serve. Because I'm mostly and completely clear that my life is a life of service.
Mm.
And I can't even imagine what else it's about.
Yeah.
And that just feels incredibly clear. And I think that comes from a daily practice of just dropping down so that you can widen out.
Mm.
And I feel like that's where courage comes from myself. Yeah.
Well, now that you mention it, I do think that your program might have been the first guidance that I received that said it's about service, because I think I was tasting a lot of things and suffering plenty, had that kind of urgency, like I know that I'm supposed to be doing something pretty big here and I don't know what it is, so the time is ticking and passing by and I feel like I'm wasting time. And I think the first assignment that we had was to read that, it might be Ram Dass book. I know it was called How Can I Help? And it's just all these different stories of like helping each other out and being of service. And I think, some people aren't authentically there, and that's fine. I ask people a lot, who do you serve? And a lot of times they're like, I don't know, I guess my daughter, and that's fine. Or people say, I don't serve. Okay, maybe, but I also can't imagine what else could satisfy this big desire inside me, except for feeling like what I'm doing is contributing something beneficial to all that I perceive to be outside of me. I don't know. It can get kind of abstract, but yeah. I'm just enjoying putting the dots together. And I'm like, oh, it was you that put this idea of like, well, we serve. And that helped. That helped everything. I made everything make a lot more sense for me.
For me too. Me too. I mean, it's just so clear. And it's like there's that wonderful old, from a couple of centuries ago, this Japanese monk, Kobo Daishi, where he said, you can tell the depth of someone's awakening process by how they serve others. Because in many ways I think to have like a practice for yourself, whatever your practice is, whether it's Buddhism or shamanism or whatever it is, it actually doesn't matter. But I think when we get to a certain level, we realize there's like, of course, a certain level has no level, but it's but you just realize that it's about loving and caring. And it's like what dying people always are pointing to as well. Like I've never met a dying person who's like, oh, I'm so glad I was so busy and self-obsessed my whole life.
I know. That's not something they say.
I've yet to meet that person.
There you go.
But it's amazing how like again and again, the messages from the dying, who are really, to me, such important voices to really receive, is that usually the great regrets are about how they loved and how they were in time, and usually about how contracted they were in particular in relationships with their community, with their family, with their loved ones, whoever they define that as. That varies. But what doesn't vary is that it's usually about relationships, and how the regret is usually the contraction from intimacy.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I can even, as you're pointing that out, I can even feel, oh, yep, I'm totally doing that right now in that relationship and that relationship. It's like
Mm.
this idea that there's infinite time to be not contracted later. Uh, but that it's fine to just be habitually contracted now.
I mean, that's why we need each other, right? To remind each other, like,
Truly.
guess what? Knock, knock, knock. What do you wait? Someone just sent me this wonderful quote from the Dalai Lama. He was saying that there's just 2 days that you can't live in. One is called yesterday, and the other one is called tomorrow.
Yeah, easier said than done, mister. So I feel you. I feel like the
All these things are so
integration.
easy to say.
Yeah. So I feel this integration of your past and your present and Buddhism and everyday life and relationship and yeah, that's something that I think feels good and that people are seeking is something of a feeling of cohesiveness or integration or like non-compartmentalization.
Mm-hmm.
And also for the purpose of structuring an interview, I'm gonna ask you to compartmentalize, and I sort of suspect that you'll continue to not. But wondering if you would speak a little bit for assuming I have a very mixed audience. So assuming that someone listening has no idea what Zen is or what makes Zen different from other kinds of Buddhism, I'm just going to ask some really basic questions. Like if you would tell us, what's Zen Buddhism? What's that all about?
Well, I'll tell you a story.
Okay.
The person who's considered one of the founders of Zen was this person named Bodhidharma, and he lived in India. And his teacher was named Prajnatara, and now we're pretty sure it was a woman, which I love.
Wow.
Which I love, There's some debate about it, but I like really thinking about Prajnatara being a woman. And and she said, you should bring these teachings to China. And so he said, okay, and went to China. And when he got to China, there was already Buddhism there. And the emperor, who was the Emperor Wu at the time, and he called this new monk from India to come meet with him. And the emperor was very satisfied with himself and said to Bodhidharma, so I've built all these wonderful temples. I've done all this stuff. How much merit do I get? And Bodhidharma just looked at him and said, no merit whatsoever.
Mm.
And this, the emperor didn't like and was enraged. And it's like, who are you to talk to me like this? And Bodhidharma said, I don't know. And so these two teachings actually to me are like the key parts of what makes Zen Zen. And Zen is a practice. It's an experience-based practice. So there's nothing to believe in. And that's one way it's quite different. And the first one is that there's no merit. You don't get anything for doing anything. And that's, to me, so radical in a culture that has been around for thousands of years that is so transactional. Like, oh, I'm going to do this and I'll get that. Or I'll do this and then you'll like me. Or I'll do this and then I get a cookie or whatever it is, And so just the full embodiment of just being an activity for being an activity. So when we practice Zen meditation, you're just sitting when you're sitting, walking when you're walking, drinking when you're drinking, the whole thing. So it's just doing and being in whatever we're doing. And the other piece is when Bodhidharma says, I don't know, it's also like very non-defensive, right? A very receptive, like, I love that he's actually able to hear and feel the emperor's anger and not take it personally. He doesn't get caught up. And so I think that's one piece of the next part of the teaching. And it's just like realizing, wow, you're really angry. And who am I? I don't know, because I'm ever changing. I'm actually different than how I was when we first turned on our conversation, or I'm different than when I first started speaking to your question. So that freshness that is always available, that we're always forgetting. And it's like easy to say all these things. And it's just like a lifetime of process and inhabiting it, I think. So I think that's, to me, what Zen is that there's no answer, and the willingness to just deeply, deeply investigate our actual experience and allow 10,000 surprises.
Well, you're certainly able to transport me anyway into the vibration of what you're experiencing through your relationship to this tradition. I always have this very practical side that's like, well, yeah, that all sounds great, but how do you do that? Like, I'm in. What do we do? So what does the practices in Buddhism look like for someone who's just beginning?
Yeah, so to me, it's the most important is, in my experience, has been having a teacher. I've had a teacher since I was 17. And so to me, like because I think that for me, having someone who's like further down the road and also who appreciates the quality of all of us, because none of us actually get it. And so to me, the practice of Zen Buddhism is actually very tied to teacher-student relationship. And, I have a teacher now, and she's like the most amazing woman, and she's now 89. And wow, she's a dynamo, and she is still learning and investigating in a deep way. And she's a gardener. And so to me, it's like having a daily practice and being in relationship. So you could say, I think having a practice of Zazen, which just means seated Zen practice, which you can find out about. And also finding a community and a teacher where you can actually be connected, because I think that we need each other so much. And the learning how to be in relationship, to me, is the heart of what Zen practice is about. And it's not easy. And the willingness to just keep uncovering.
It's interesting because what I feel when you're talking, I feel the same things that my mantra practice or goddess worship or goddess studies, where that takes me. And Tantra aesthetically is kind of, I think everything's misunderstood, but just misunderstood as like, these like fiery, demonic, almost demonic looking art and women. And you can read books by very established scholars about how it's all about acquiring supernatural powers and all these things. But it's not. It's really about relationship and presence and intimacy, like with all of life. And so having started out with Zen, I have this like point of comparison where I feel they're essentially the same. So why I practice in this way versus in that way that I was originally taught, I don't know. And that's part of the mystery that I enjoy. Like you saying, why is it that I knew that I wanted to be a Zen Buddhist monk when I was 8? Like, what was that clarity about? Where, like, there is a way in which we just kind of find some practice, or we can find some practice or tradition where we keep showing up for it, or we keep doing it, or it keeps showing up for us. And just like, I'm not sure, but this is the portal in for me. But the place that it goes, to me, it's all going to the same place. These are just different gateways or different portals. Yeah.
It's amazing. I was just thinking about this story someone was just telling me the other day about Maizumi Roshi, who's the founder of our lineage in the United States. And he had this teacher who was like this amazing, super lively koan teacher. And he didn't like Zen people coming and speaking at his zendo. So he only had this guy who was a fishmonger who would like actually, was the person who cut up all the fish after they were gone. He would only have this guy come who used to like deal with the fish parts, come and talk about his experience at his zendo. Because he felt like Zen people, they're just so caught up in ideas, but he actually is in his experience. So he doesn't know about Zen, but he knows about how to be an experience. It reminds me of what you're saying. It's just like the expression and the outer forms are so different. Like you wouldn't think like this person reeking of fish would necessarily be giving a talk at a Zen center.
Yeah.
But it's about the heart, right?
That's beautiful. Again, just that feeling of reminder. Lots of things you're saying are just feel like very timely reminders for me. Hopefully they feel like timely reminders to other people listening across time and space. So another really practical questions. I remember, I think I was probably a while, like a few months into the year-long chaplaincy training with your program, when someone asked me like, oh, what's a chaplain? And I was like, I don't know. Like it hadn't really occurred to me. I was kind of following some voice inside and some thread of intuition and synchronicities, and enjoying the environment and the teachings. And it's like I had failed to focus on that little fact that this was a chaplaincy training. And their question just made me realize, oh, yeah, I should probably know that. So also guessing there's some other people who maybe have never heard that word or think they know what it means but don't really. And so going to ask you again to just like define this really basic term, or that's a major part of what you do in the world and how you serve.
Yeah, so who knows what it really means, but the word chaplain actually comes from a French word that it means a cape that you put over someone so that they can feel warm when they're cold. And I love that because it reminds me of the Irish, where they say like a feeling of sorrow or a feeling of joy is upon me like a cape. So it's like that things arise and we wear them for a time, whether it's a feeling or a person can be with us for a time. And so for me, a chaplain is traditionally it's become thought of as a more religious position, But for me, it's a spiritual livelihood where you are available to be with someone in their most vulnerable states of facing their illness or sickness or struggles. So you could be in a prison, or you could be in a school, or in a hospital or hospice. And the chaplains exist in many places. There's even ones for the park service. And
Wow.
But I think it's really being available to whatever is arising and being super curious about how people are processing their emotions and how they're making meaning out of their experience. It's like it's a rare position in this world. It's like the one position in some ways where you don't have to do anything but to be with someone. Not
Which
too
is
shabby.
hard.
That's why it takes lots of training. Yeah.
That's the irony to me, is like to do nothing or to be still takes like superhero training.
Exactly. Like the
For starting when
simplest.
you're 11 years old, like it's a real challenging skill to master. That probably could never be mastered. You just have to continue.
Never mastered.
Interested in trying to show up for that.
And the willingness to never really have the answer.
Uh-oh. I like to have the answer. I do. It's a problem.
So far.
Yeah, that, because there's this whole like oracle skill set that I have, and so I try to just use it when someone asks, like when someone else really believes that some answers would help them right now, then I there is a place I can go that I don't know where the words come from. I don't know where the answers come from, and the vocabulary is not my own. There's no attachment to it. I say things that I'm like, "Ooh, nail biter, that was mean," and it's not received as mean because it feels like truth to them. Like with things where I can observe that there's an Aaron that's going like, "Yikes!" Like, don't say that, and yet it's coming out. And I'm just kind of in inquiry of like, how is that okay? Because like I don't know, and I don't know the answers, but yet I do this thing where I tell people answers to stuff. And big shrug. And so I think that there's a way in which I like to be around Zen practitioners because they feel ultimately humble to the mystery, or at least more committed to bringing themselves back to the part of themselves that doesn't know, and that just it feels soft and welcoming and alive and juicy. And then the more you creep toward knowing, it's sort of like the drier and less juicy everything becomes.
Totally.
So, to go back to the other side of that paradox and ask you to answer questions and be the expert. I love the irony of how this conversation is unfolding. So, how many people would you say that you personally have sat with at the end of their life?
Someone asked me that the other day. Many. I don't know. It feels actually kind of strange to even say.
I know, that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah. Like I don't even know what it would mean to be like, 1 million or 100,000, or it's been a lot of people. And I feel like in many ways, quantifying it, it's really interesting. I feel like each of them have been such intimate experiences And I think it's better to say, and more accurate, is that I have had the privilege to be intimate with people at the end of their lives since I was a teenager. And they've been children and teenagers and young mothers and a young father and many parents and grandparents, and with all such full lives. And to me, that's more important. It's just to remember all of them. And as we're talking, I could just feel them kind of cycling through. And so to kind of call them a number would be, ooh, I don't know, funny, strange.
Would it feel okay to you if I stated a number? To it just be like Shiva to your Shakti here? Because it's like, when you speak, it's like just very expansive and it's like beautiful. And I don't know where it comes from, but I'm feeling, it feels a little mischievous almost, but wanting to weave that back in with structure and other parts of my brain. And
Cool.
It feels like I'm being a little bit mischievously poking at your steadfast expansiveness. If I'm honest. But I believe I saw on your website that your programs and the people that have come through your programs have served something like 94,000 people at the end of their lives. And to me, what that number did was give me a sense of the weight and the impact of how it gave me hope, because you're a special individual. I don't meet people like you every day that have the quality of presence and the commitment and the time, have put in like the time around a particular intention. And that out there in the world, I can start to feel sometimes like certain challenges are overwhelming, and especially the idea of like how we die and how we approach death as a culture feels like, oh, it's just so far away from what would feel natural to me. So then to see that number and say, well, that's almost 100,000 people being served by this one center that hasn't even been open very long, and there's other centers in the world. Actually, we might be okay. We might be heading in the right direction. It feels really good. And just to honor you, yeah.
Well, to me, the true pleasure is like I get to do this with my husband, and doing it together to me it's like our love child, and it's our baby, and so I feel that our love for each other and our love of practice and the practice of being with people, to me, the work, any benefit that comes from it, which has been so that we'll never truly understand, for me, really comes out of our trust and love for each other, I think.
And it's a good example of how you're saying like everything comes back to relationship. And I definitely have personally experienced the way that the dynamism between the two of you and your very different personalities creates a really spacious feeling container for other people to find their flavor and their relationship to the material you're presenting. So you're a good team.
I agree.
Oh, yay, Chodo. Yeah, I hope he'll come on the show next. Maybe immediately following as the counterpoint. Yeah. So, my own relationship to death has really changed a lot over the years, but continues to not go away, this idea that I should be paying more attention to death than I was raised to believe that I should. So as a teenager, it was very empowering. I really felt like I found myself in the goth music movement, where I didn't know what my attraction to was. I didn't know why I wanted to like put pictures of skulls and gravestones on my bedroom wall and like listen to music about death and like, you know, put black eyeshadow all around my eyes, so it looks like empty sockets. Like, oh, where did that come from? But looking back, I feel like I understand that there was something in me that was like, it's very, very wrong how much you're all ignoring death. So I'm going to, because you're ignoring it so hard, somebody has to counterbalance that by being obsessed with it. And I'm going to be like this billboard that puts it in your face and like sits in church with like my skull t-shirt and like whatever, like this sense of extremes where we've gone so far in one extreme as a culture that then we create these subcultures that attempt to balance us out, and that the somewhere in between is actually where we're trying to get to. And then kind of not wanting that all the trappings of that scene and be like, that's not me, I'm about love and light, and you know, that kind of is like an extreme also. And so it was a couple of years ago, I was in a medicine ceremony and I was just trying to heal my body, and I was like, why don't I feel good? And the medicine teachers, the plant teachers, just kind of the way that a Zen teacher might like give you a koan or something. They're like, well, we're not going to like break this down and spoon feed it to you, but here's a phrase to contemplate. And it was nourished by death. I was like, you know, I'm sick, my body's not well, I don't have vitality. And they were like, okay, nourished by death. Think about that. And it took me a long time. I don't think I've unpacked it still, but definitely it had to do with things like eating meat, eating fermented foods, eating things that like taste a little funky, you know, like that are at a different point in the life cycle of starting to break down a little, eating partially digested foods. And so I came to this sense of this is a diagnosis of where we're at as a culture. That a lot of emotional and physical lack of vitality comes from the fact that we just want everything to be squeaky clean. And if something is the slightest bit like gone over, like getting old, that we can't consume it, we can't be intimate with it, we can't allow ourselves to smell and taste it, to merge with it. And so this has helped me like come to a much greater place of vitality. And I'm wondering, like, would you agree that like our avoidance of some of these things, like the realities of later phases of the life cycle that are moving toward death and like not being able to allow ourselves to receive from dead things or dead people the way that like the rest of the natural world does, is inhibiting our ability to live like robust, vital lives? Does that resonate with you, or would you put it in a way?
Yeah, well, I love how you're talking about it and so appreciate it. Yeah, for me, it's about, you know, we live in a culture that puts away the, you know, from a Buddhist point of view, you know, the Buddha talked about like actually, the problem is that we don't face our vulnerability, our aging, our illness, and our dying, and like the most vulnerable moments of our life. And we put old people in nursing homes, we put sick people in hospitals, and now we put dying people in a hospice. So it's like we like found places to shut them all away. You know, in some of the nursing homes that we, Soto and I and our community visit, you know, many of the people have not been visited in 7 to 10 years.
Wow.
And one woman was saying, like, I think you're the first person to look me in the eye in 7 years.
I mean, that's prison. It's solitary confinement that you're describing.
Right. Right. And so I think that and it's very interesting, the CDC with the banned words, it's so very timely that the word vulnerability is being banned.
What?
For the Center for Disease Control, they were just given the mandate to not use the word vulnerability in talking about health.
Why would they do that? What intention could that possibly have?
Well, because it makes you think about people, doesn't it, differently if you think about if they're vulnerable. And it might evoke compassion.
Oh, fuck.
But it's very timely, I think, that we live in a culture where that would be the case and suggested. Like, no more using the word vulnerability. Zip it.
Wow.
Powerful. It's powerful. And I think so we just have to use that word more.
Yes, I love you. You're,
Vulnerability.
That is the resistance. That is the rebellion. Thank you. So, be vulnerable. Friendly reminder, one I'm always welcome to receiving from people in my environment, or be curious about other people's vulnerabilities, and respectful, I would say, or even reverent to other people's vulnerabilities. What other advice would you give to someone who maybe just found out they're dying, or just found out that someone close to them is dying, and maybe they Googled the words death and dying and they found their way to this interview? Like, what's that first welcome that you might want to offer, or orientation to this next deeper level of reality?
Well, I think of my friend named Ira Byock, who's a wonderful doctor, and he talks about we have to talk about what matters most. Like, what is it that really is the most meaningful to you now? And to me, the more we can get clear even before we know we're dying, because the leading cause of death, has never changed, which is birth. And so because we're born, we die. And I think that whether we just found out that we're dying, or we know eventually we will, to really consider, like, actually what's the most important, or what are the most important things, and how do I tend to those with the time that I have? And to me, the beauty of being with dying people, whether it's my own grandma or all the people I've had the privilege to be with, it's really like that possibility of getting clear about those things, about how do you want to be in the time that you have.
Well, thank you. Are there any, as an expert in the field, wondering if there are books or resources or speakers that you feel do a really good job at helping people be present to the realities of death and dying happening around them, that you would want to share?
Yeah, so I would say, well, one, Awake at the Bedside is a collection of all of my favorite people. So I edited that book. So, like, actually, it's a nice way to get a super collective good vibe of people who you could then read more of each of them. I think that there's also a beautiful book called In the Body of the World by Eve, and it's written by Eve Ensler. And it's about her experience of cancer and how that's related to the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And her experience of becoming diagnosed and potentially being terminal, and then not potentially being terminal. And also but the relationship between indigenous people and the planet. And she just weaves it all in the most powerful way.
Wow.
I think that's one of my favorite books these days, about what it means to be alive and to be vulnerable.
Amazing. Well, to be continued. I will just make that spell right now because I really enjoyed our conversation and hope to have more with you in the near future. So just a formal thank you to you, Koshin.
What a joy to be with you, Erin.
Thank you to all the benevolent beings in all the realms who've gathered here today to inspire and direct the flow of this conversation. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be well. May all beings know joy and not suffer. Jai Ma, blessed be Aho, Namaste, Amen, why not? May it be finished in beauty. Thank you.
So much love to you, Erin.
forgetting about taking the time to make time about making space to walking past through all of your information, all your hobbies, celebrations, showing up with our gifts and showing up with one of us. Beloved, it's been 1,000 years. Love driving tears, 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 tears.